Hello there. Few things before we start. Number one, these are my favorite secondary weapons, not yours. If you don't like them, that's okay. Number two, no kit guns. And finally, number three, I'm running corrosive projection on my Naros, so I'm stripping away a little bit of the enemy armor. So in at number one, we have an absolute fan favorite. I know that a ton of people enjoy this weapon, including myself. It is the one and only Kuwari Nucor. For the build, we have Galvanized Diffusion and Shot, as well as secondary Merciless, which I haven't maxed out, not necessarily because I'm a pleb, but because I just don't get any secondary arcanes for some reason. We follow that up with Lethal Torrent for more multi-shot and fire rate, as well as Primed Pistol Gambit, even though the weapon doesn't have a lot of crit chance. This is because Nucors come with an extraordinarily high critical multiplier, which is why we also run Prime Target Cracker. And I very much prefer Primed Pistol Gambit here over Galvanized Crosshairs, because even though you would get more crit chance with Galvanized Crosshairs, you would also constantly have to aim down sights and kill things with headshots, which is pretty annoying to do with a beam weapon that chains around. But anyway, to top it all off, we're gonna run Frostbite and Pistol Pestilence for vital and status, and then we have Primed Heated Charge for a ton of heat. Now, if you're gonna use this in high-level content like Steel Path, for example, I would highly recommend you run at least Pistol Ammo Mutation, but ideally Primed Pistol Ammo Mutation, because the Kuwari Nucor is one of the few beam weapons that actually burns through ammo fairly quickly. But it's also one of the strongest beam weapons in the game. This is basically the Amprex on steroids. The damage it does is ridiculously good, even on its own, but if you give it a little bit of extra added flat crit chance, like from Harrow or an Adarza Kavat, ooh mama, the damage is gonna be disgusting. The Nucor might not have the best single target damage, and you can sometimes feel that on some of the chunkier Eximus units, but it more than makes up for it with the beam chaining around. This is one of my favorite secondaries of all time. It's just really good for many different things. It is not very good against status resistant enemies though, so if you're gonna take this into Steel Path, make sure you have a decent primary or melee weapon to take care of the acolytes. In at number two, we have by far the biggest surprise of this list. It's the smallest gun that packs the biggest bang, the Incarnon monstrosity that is the Laetum. As far as the evolutions go, we have the Incarnon form, of course. We follow that up with Rapid Wrath for the extra fire rate. The third one doesn't really matter. I run Lethal Rearmament for the extra reload time. The two important ones, though, are the second to last one, which is Elemental Excess for extra status chance at the cost of crit. And of course the big one, Devouring Attrition, which gives you a 50% chance to deal 2000% extra damage on a non-critical hit. Now the build I run for these evolutions is Galvanized Diffusion and Shot, as well as secondary Merciless. I have Lethal Torrent for the fire rate and multi-shot, Frostbite and Pistol Pestilence for vital and status, Prime Heated Charge and Scorch for a ton of heat and status, and I top it off with Stunning Speed for even more status and reload speed. The reason I like reload speed here, even though you don't really reload this weapon all that much because of the way it works, is because reload speed also affects the speed at which you switch to and from Incarnon mode. I think we all know what this weapon is about, right? The regular mode is okay, it's a single shot pistol that does decent damage, but it's mostly just there so that you can hit a few headshots and build your Incarnon mode to transform the weapon into an absolute monstrosity that will devour all enemies that dare stand before you. This weapon, in its Incarnon mode, is just stupid. One thing I will say about it though is that it has a really painful ramp up, because when you first get into a mission you have nothing stacked up, you know, your arcane, your galvanized stuff, and you also don't have Incarnon mode, so it hurts a little bit, but once you get it going, it is an absolute beast. It's also one of the few weapons that just does so much raw damage. You don't necessarily have to build it for status, and you can build it for raw damage, which will actually make it perform a little bit better against status resistant enemies like the acolytes. So if you don't have the Laetum yet, what are you doing? Go get it. And finally we arrive at number 3. This was a difficult one to pick because there's a ton of good secondaries, but in the end I ended up giving it to the Nell Prime. Now for the build, we run Galvanized Diffusion, Galvanized Shot, and Galvanized Crosshairs, which I haven't maxed out because I am actually a pleb, as well as secondary Deadhead for the extra damage and headshot multiplier. We follow that up with Lethal Torrent for the fire rate and multi-shot, Frostbite and Pistol Pestilence for vital and status, Primed Heated Charge for heat, and we top it all off with Prime Target Cracker for crit damage. Now for the Exiles, it doesn't really matter, I haven't even unlocked it here, but what you could do is run either Steady Hands to get less recoil, or you could silence it if you want to. The Nell Prime is an absolute boss when it comes to single target damage if you can get enough headshots with it. Because if you can sustain the Death Knell buff, which with the Nell Prime is granted when you headshot something and it increases your crit damage, status chance and gives you infinite ammo, it does not matter how strong the enemy is, how much health or armor they have, you can just keep hammering them down until they die. But that also means that you need to be at least a decent shot to use this weapon, because if you can't get headshots often enough, this weapon is downright useless. This is why the weapon is allowed to be as strong as it is. The damage this dishes out is downright disgusting, but it requires you to get those headshots in order to pull it off. Don't be too scared of it though, because I am an average shot at best. I'm not particularly good at aiming, and even I can sustain the death knell buff throughout the majority of the mission, and if I can do it, so can you. It's really not that hard to land a headshot here and there, especially after the first headshot when the weapon goes full auto. Also, out of the 3 weapons that I showed you today, this is probably my favorite one to use against an acolyte. It puts them down very quickly. And that is pretty much it for the video, so I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, let me know what are your favorite secondary weapons in the comment section down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.